Hello everyone, today we'll be looking at traps in Alekhine's defense. Alekhine's defense is a modern opening and is designed basically to provoke white to overextend, advance and set up a center and basically try to get white to overextend the center and then prove that it's weak. So you might say, wow, black is allowing white to set up this huge center, and white must have the advantage. But it's not that easy. Although white has a huge center here, it takes a lot of work to maintain and protect all of these pawns. And what happens is black slowly starts to attack and break down white's center. And also, with the advance, there's holes that have been created. In other words, there's no way that white can really get these squares back unless he uses pieces. So what black's idea is in all the hyper modern defenses is to basically attack the center with pieces. So for example, knight c3, and notice how black only has one pawn attacking the chain here, but then he has all these pieces developed around the center. That's the idea. White's task is to try to maintain the center that is set up. If white can maintain uh, even part of the center, maybe not the whole thing, but if he can maintain the E pawn and D pawn, then he will have an advantage in space and be able to restrict the movement of black. But if black can counterattack and tear down the white center, he'll be in a great position. So let's look at some traps. Okay, so e4, knight f6. Now the main line I showed you is just e5, of course. But for our purposes, we're going to look at bishop c4. This is a move we might see in blitz sometime. And black has really nothing to worry about, but it can be, tricky sometime. Knight takes e4, white gambits the pawn, and here's the idea: is bishop takes f7, king takes f7, queen h5 check, and king f6, and white is better, queen f3, and say he tries to protect the piece, and most of you can see that black is busted here. d4, the king takes d. It's kind of comical. The king is on d4. King takes d4, knight e2 check, king e5, bishop f4, and let's just end it gracefully. The king f5, and of course, bishop takes f7 with the discovered attack on the queen. So okay, so the basic lesson is, of course, not to try to memorize anything, but just to understand. Again, this bishop is very powerful when it comes to the c4, and you have to watch the action there. So it's probably, I'm sure, like it may be some theoretical long engine computer preparation. This pawn can be taken, but for practical purposes, it's better to just avoid taking that pawn. So if you see this bishop coming to c4, white gets too much compensation after knight takes e4. So I don't care what the engine might say, don't take this pawn. It's probably better to block the action of the bishop, maybe with e6. can be played, and d5 is also interesting. All right, let's look at the next one. So e4, knight f6, d3 is another offbeat line that people like to play. And sometimes, white is not prepared for the Alekhine, so that's why these kind of lines creep up. So d3, e5, there's nothing wrong with just taking the center. One line I used to like to play a lot is knight f6 here, just holding back on bringing my pawns out. And that's totally playable also. d3, e5, nothing wrong with that. Let's say f4. Here's a nice moment right here. We see that this pawn is under attack, and so the basic idea is white wants to get black to give up his center here, and after bishop takes, and then say knight c6, black is still okay here. He doesn't have to worry about e5 because the knight will just jump here. But in this game, black played bishop c5, which is just as viable and develops a piece and weaken dark square here. Now the idea here is a tactical one, right? But after f takes e5, knight takes e4, d takes e4, right? It's a mistake. D takes e4, and I'll show you why in a second. Queen h4 check. King e2. And here it is. Queen takes e4. Check. King d2 and queen e3 mate. And you can see some of the features here with the dark squares along with the weakened king side that was brought about by the advance of the f pawn. Right, so that was like a neat little trap for black. However, after knight takes e4, because we've seen the main idea is to bring the queen here, you just play white could just play queen g4 here and put a stop to all of that. So although interesting, it's not altogether sound. It's more of a trappy thing. So instead of bishop c5, just simply e takes f4, bishop takes f4, followed by knight to c6, and black is a-okay. Alright, let's look at next one. So e4, knight f6, again d3, d5, e5, natural move. And if you're the type of player that enjoys closed position, then you would play it move like d5 here, because it challenges the player or provokes the player to advance. So e4, e5, knight fd7, d4, c5. Now the game takes on a French defense character. Bishop d3. Now, of course, c3 is better. Bishop d3, C takes d4, and white allowed this because white wants to gambit here. Play e6. Now the best move here for black is knight e5. And the idea is if e takes f7, then knight takes f7, and although his pawns are a little jacked up, he is ahead of material, and he will still retain castling rights. However, in this game, f takes e6 was played, and after queen h5 check. Okay, we have a problem again with the white squares. Notice how the f pawn has been deflected over here, and now the diagonal to the king is open. So after queen h5 check, g6, and then simply bishop takes g6, h takes g6, queen takes g6 is mate. Nowhere for the king to go. And also, if you want to get real fancy, you can play queen takes g6 with the same scenario. So that's an idea to be careful of, especially when your knight is on e7 like that, is watch out for the prying open. Watch out for the prying open of the f file with this bishop and queen lined up like that together. That's the main idea there. Alright, let's move on. e4, knight f6, knight c3, another option. And I just want to show you a funny trap here. This shows you how vulnerable the how crazy this position can get. This is like a completely normal position, but just for instance, there's a random move, rook g8, right? Black has already lost a piece, e5, and there's nowhere for the knight to go. Right? Look at that. All these squares are covered. G8, rook G8 is taking the retreat square from the knight. Not that anybody would play that, but the idea is just to show you how quick black can get into trouble in that with this defense. Just by playing knight c3, all these squares in the center just get cut off immediately. So you have to keep your eyes open. Alright, let's go to the next one. So e4, knight f6. So here's knight c3. So now you know the basic idea. The idea is to drive this knight out of competition, basically. Because now, let me just show you. See, with the immediate pawn move, then black just merrily hops into the center. Right, he can go here, and there's a kind of offbeat line where black goes there, but it's not as sound. Right, that's the normal. Black would just hop into knight d5. However, after knight c3, e5 is threatened, and these squares aren't available. That's why I showed you that last exaggerated trap with the rook on g8, just to emphasize the point that now the knight has nowhere to go in the center. So now if white can move again, he would play e5, and then this knight would have to go back here. Okay, so knight c3, knight c6. The idea is to stop the using the piece to stop the pawn from advancing. d4, here's a full center. g6, d5. And here's an example that if black gets too carried away with this modern approach and lets white and neglects the center too much, what can happen? So after knight e4, simply f4, attacking the knight. And the only move right here is knight e g4, and then e5. And now one of these knights has to go. If knight back here to h6, then this knight will fall. And then if this knight moves, say back to g8, then this knight gets captured by the queen after knight g8. So you have to be very careful in allowing that pawn advance. Of course, completely playable is e5. Then you're in, like I said, the Vienna game, or you could play d5, which is more provocative. And you get these crazy lines like this, you know. Then it gets real tactical. That's for another time. All right, and let's look at another one. So e4, knight f6. Let's look at knight c3 again. g6. Knight d5. Again, now here, just simply e5. Driving the knight away is the best move. Yeah, let's play a move like that. You can follow up d4 and have nice control of the center. But instead of that, g6, knight d5 was played. And this is again to illustrate another idea. So again, we see this pawn is left on prise here. So should we take it? So after knight takes e4, queen e2. Now the best move here, my friends, is c6, counterattacking. But white has a good game after c6, queen takes e4, c takes d5, queen takes d5, and probably bishop g7 covering the diagonal. So white has a decent game. I mean, it's pretty it's equal. You know, I mean, black's gonna play knight c6, castle. It looks kind of like, you know, Sicilian flavor with the open c file, but white is gonna be able to establish his center after knight f3, d4, etc. His queen is kind of awkwardly placed here, but he'll probably find a good home on b5 or b3 or something like that. But what's the idea here? The idea, what I want to show you, is after queen e2, you have to be careful. Because of knight d6, we have mate. Because this pawn is pinned. And can't capture the knight here. And then of course if knight f6, knight takes f6 is also mate for the same reason. So be very careful. Let's look at our next one. Alright, and this will be our last one of today. Alright, e4, knight f6, knight c3, d5, there's the move I was talking about, e5. And there's several ways to play. You can push this pawn here, right? You can jump in with the knight, or you can play knight f d7 depending on what type of position you prefer. C5, D4, C5, and notice this pawn is left unprotected. Knight takes D5, C takes D4, and the natural move, Queen takes D4. So you can already see right here that the Queen comes out early, and that the Knight is able to come here attack the Queen, and these two knights together will be able to attack this E pawn. So that's the first move that comes to mind for me. However, there's something else in mind, and there's Knight B6 here. Knight B6. And the idea here is to pin this knight with two pieces against the queen. Now C4, have E6, and it looks like black is going to win this piece. So therefore, white is in serious trouble here, because what can he do? There's really nothing to do. After bishop G5, right, more like a desperado move, right, to distract the queen. Bishop B5 check, bishop B4 check. Now what? You bring the bishop back, you just take the knight after exchanging. And note, knight can't capture because then this queen would just drop. If bishop goes back, then a quick exchange here could take place, followed by capturing, or just simply I gotta answer the check first, or simply knight C6 is possible, attacking the queen again. But the easiest thing is just bishop takes, queen takes. So for instance, with king E2, lost the rights of castling, and then just queen D7. And then again, there's really nothing that can be done because of the situation of this queen. So be very careful in the openings, grabbing pawns. To show you that again, C takes D4, queen takes D4. And again, my first thought was that, hey, just play knight C6, because you're attacking the queen and you have two pieces attacking this pawn, and that's a good move also. Black is fine there. Black is basically just equalized after queen D2, knight takes E5. Black is equalized, but if you look a little further, again you see this opportunity with this queen that's unprotected. Remember, I always say, look at pieces that are unprotected and pieces that are only protected by one piece. So this knight is only protected by the queen. And there's a way to exploit that. So we attack the piece again, and then the piece behind it is totally unprotected. And that's what hands over the victory there. And again, C4 is really the only defense. But then E6, that's a wrap. Then say if one more variation of bishop B5 check, trying to get black to do something like that, just simply knight C6. Same threats, everything applies. Again, C4, E6, with the action of the queen saving the day. Alright folks, that is it for now. Please like, subscribe, and we'll see you on the next installation of traps in the Alekhine defense. Alright, talk to you guys later. Good luck in all your chess games.